The first of these is Suhasini. She's going to be talking about land suitability analysis. Suhasini has been a resident of Oroville since 1995, an urban planner and
85.
architect. Oh, 85. I can't read.
You just get 10 years gone like that.
Okay, I stand.
35 years are gone like that. So
I stand corrected. And she's been involved in initiating, developing, designing, and implementing public projects across Oroville, like the Visitor Centre and the Humanscapes development, which recently was awarded the Green Solutions Award in the COP26 summit. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And so over to Suhasini.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about a study that was a follow-up. Lata and Prashant did their study on the topographical analysis that was done with Doshibai. That's done, okay. So when Dr. B.V. Doshi became the chairman of TDC and was part of the governing board, he laid out a kind of plan of action. Okay, he said you have to do this, 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 based on which you will be able to bring together three things. One is how to translate the galaxy concept and the master plan into a kind of land use plan and a detailed development plan. Okay? So the first work that was done in 2009-10, which you have seen already, where Prashant must have presented it, which was done, Lalit was part of it, Tejaswini was part of it, Dhruv and others, was to take the topographical analysis and the galaxy concept and see what it gives. This was a follow-up on that. It took me about only 2 years to get the TDC to agree that we should do this study. And so in 2012, we started on the work with a work order from TDC to look at just the city area, because David Stein was doing the green belt. So, okay. So why did we do this study? Because to undertake, which is after the topographical analysis and other things, we need to do a certain land suitability analysis to be able to then identify with the zonal plans what should be our land use. Okay, and I don't know how much people know about the regulations after the 73rd, 74th Amendment and 1996 urban planning implementation, those studies, because the master plan is kind of an omnibus that takes three different things that was given in the 1996 UDPI regulation. And so we looked at it and we said, okay, the purpose of a land use plan what is it? Is to have a public policy that encompasses several disciplines which seek to order and regulate land use in an efficient, ethical way to prevent land use conflict. We are having one more conflict going on now since the last 6 months. Manage the development of the land within its jurisdiction and plan for the needs of the community while safeguarding natural resources. And the last is, of course, a land use plan is the base information to prepare urban planning guidelines, including transportation network to guide and ensure orderly development. Because I see that people have come up with mobility plans, people have come up with mobility concepts, but when you do an integrated land use plan, only then you can actually have a land use and mobility integrated, because mobility is a component of land use. You cannot just have a separate land use plan and a separate DDP and a separate mobility plan. These things are all interlinked. If it's housing, you have a certain kind of mobility in that area, and if it is actually services or if it's manufacturing, so a land use plan is very essential before you can actually do a mobility plan. Where is it? It's there? Okay, so we took up the project in 2 phases. One was to map the present land use. And I was very lucky that Dr. Devyani, I don't know how many of you know her, she is a soil scientist, GIS expert, plus she has experiential knowledge in water and other areas. And she was one of the main persons in actually doing the analysis of the present land use. And then using to analyze the land suitability, for a proposed land use, where the zonal plan, which is in the master plan, would be the basis. Because if you look at the zonal plan in the master plan document, there are 6 predominant zones: residential, cultural, industrial, international, but then there's the administrative area, and then there's an educational zone, which is all linked together by various other activities. So, madam, okay. Hi. So we then, before we started the work, we said we will fix certain operating principles. I mean, this is just a very short synopsis. The document was almost 6 pages, the operating principles. One of it was to incorporate the ecosystem services output for long-term sustainability of the project. So when we are doing the land use plan for the city area, with the help of Lata's work and Prashant's work, and also looking at work done by Malini in IIT Mumbai, we looked at what would be the cascading effect of our proposed land use plan on the region, and how they would be in symbiosis with each other, because most of the people around are downstream from us. And we would be informed by the proposed zones and roads of the Master Plan 2025 based on the galaxy concept of the township. Because it's not just the topography and the land, but we also have a concept, we also have a master plan. And the third would be, how do we provide for sustainable network between developed and open space? And this is really important because it's not a question of numbers. We cannot say, look, we have 50% of the area is greenbelt, so here we can crowd people with just this much, you know. There has to be an equity of open spaces. There is a cascading effect of people living crowded in one area and having a lot of open space in another area, which does not really work if you want to have a city with the kind of ideals laid out by the charter. And mobility and function, I already covered that the land use actually informs the mobility. It's not like you have a standalone vertical of mobility and a standalone vertical of land use plan. And about how the services and densities are interlinked. Depending on the number of people, kind of activities, and the density, the services are distributed based on that. We cannot just isolate them in different parts of Oroville. And of course, this is something which is quite difficult. We didn't have really a qualified person. We just could get a little bit of inputs from people like Aroma Ravi and K.T. Ravindran and Dr. B.V. Doshi, was the cultural capacity of Oroville. Because you have to understand that it's not like a normal city where you come in because there are opportunities and you can have a certain quality of life, and so you settle down here, your children can go to school, and you can have a savings and a pension and property and all that. How do you actually have a cultural quality of life that is aligned with the goals and aims of Oroville without all the security, either social or financial, that is the drivers or the engines of most cities, okay? And the interdependency between Oroville and the regional context. So we are not building an island, no matter how much we wish it was. So all these different things, I'm not going to read it out. Sophie has the thing. But actually what I would invite you all to do is, I have shared the report. This is just a synopsis. The report gives detailed analysis of different parts. It also gives you the linkages between different documents that have been used from previous studies, like the water studies that were done and studies that were done for the food security and other things. We have been looking at all the different studies, and references are given in it. So we start first with the zoning as per the master plan. So if you look at it, what we have put together is the existing roads, buildings, pathways, land ownership, and the zones as per the master plan. The 4 predominant zones you have, and then when it comes around where the kindergarten center field is, that is supposed to be the educational zone, and then we have the administrative zone. And we looked at the roads as they're given in the master plan. So we said we are looking at these 2 things, and the galaxy concept, of course, which is the master plan is deriving the zonal aspect, not the roads, but okay, let's not go in there. So in 2012, this was cutoff date was December 2012. This was the land ownership with the different types of land ownership: Oroville, private land, temple land, Parambuk land, existing water bodies, village settlements. Then from there we looked at elevation. Oroville sits on a ridge. Prashant must have told you about it. The ridge is just slightly southeast of Matramandar. You have two predominant kind of water flows. One, the coastal side is what we call the sheet flow, and towards the inland side we have gully flow. Then from there we looked at the sheet flow and the gully flow and looked at what is happening in terms of percolation within the city area. Look, and this map needs to be updated because we could do this only based on two data points. One is that there are soil samples from different area that was done based on well drilling. We have soil data on different bore wells done in different parts of Oroville. Using that granulometry and other things, we know what is the percolation capacity. But that is not sufficient because, as you can see, that only in areas where we have present settlements, there are bore wells. There are areas where we don't have bore wells, and we need to do that. Because percolation, high percolation areas really need to be protected. And areas which have gully flow are our future to make sure that we have water security. From this, between both the topographical thing of the sheet flow and gully flow, the watersheds were extracted, the micro and watersheds were extracted to see how they actually merge into the three main watersheds towards Kaliveli, towards the coast, and towards Irumbai Eri. And from there, we superimposed all the three: soil, watersheds, gully flow, watersheds, and looking at what is the existing situation in terms of land ownership, how much of the water part that Oroville actually controls. And this is very, very important because actually what I'm saying is kind of stupid because even on Oroville land, we don't have a say on what happens on Oroville land, but we cannot go and tell the villagers and the government what they should do. So if we have a situation like here, we have a situation where we have very predominant gully flows, which links to these two areas. We have check dams. We have looked at what happens if we have a setback that allows us to hold the water, hold the soil along the canyons to improve on our water holding capacity without depriving the downstream people of their capacity to fill up their ponds and areas. Because it's not a question of just holding the water, but also sharing the water. And holding and sharing of water have led to global wars and state wars and Supreme Court this. So we need to make sure that we don't have that kind of conflict in our region. So this was needed to look at how do we hold water without it being an aggressive engineering solution, but rather as a land use solution where we can have a system of collection, overflows, channels, holding soil percolation, sponge effect, and things like that. And then we looked at the present land use in terms of plantation. And we only looked at where it was a certain density of plantation. This we got from maps that the Green Group had and maps that were derived from the Google data of at that time. So we had 2002, and we just looked at each of the Google Earth maps from 2002 to 2012 to see how the tree cover evolved, and then talked to people who were stewards of different areas. Like for Revelation, we talked with Patrick and Christo to understand how much of the plantation was actually changed over from the original primary species that were just there, and then the plantation that was done with the indigenous trees and where it was planted with certain kind of species that were endozoic, so that the replantation that happens downstream is actually affected without direct intervention. These patches that you see, amazingly, were all on top of major water flows in this area. And if you see here also, so this part, we realize that this Darkali sits on a major pour point between these two canyons. Pony Farm sits between these two canyons. Discipline actually has a very peculiar soil situation that holds the water between two layers of soil, because it is clay, it's kind of silty clay on the top, and then they have pebble clay, and it just seals itself and holds quite a bit of water in between the two. And Revelation with the stream that goes this way, and also part of it goes to the Kaliveli, and then of course Samriddhi Existence Bliss area. But these were, we realized, very critical, and this Oro Dam was very critical because as you can see, it goes to the Irumbai Eri. Then we looked at ecologically sensitive area. Again, this map needs to be updated because at this point, Mona and Popo had only surveyed this much, and since then, now it's almost 8 years ago, they have further data that has to be done. And when you look at, it's amazing is that when you look at, if you look at this point, and if you look at this point, it makes a lot of sense that this was actually an area of settlement between this whole area and the watershed. That, you know, it does make sense if you just look at the geography of the place, that people have been there since quite some time, because it naturally lends to, you know, development and in terms of cultural milestones being put there. Same here, you can look at it. This is you don't find it on the coastal watershed, a part of it. And then, of course, existing village. This is a very peculiar situation because what you see here, okay, that's one more thing that I have to tell you. As per, I think it was in 1872 finally that under the British thing that the revenue patta documents and land registration and all that, it was. So when land use plans are made using the Amrit 2.0 guidelines, you still have to maintain revenue borders for your land schedule when you do land use. You cannot say like we did, this is our zone, so this is what it has to follow the, in between we can come up with micro this, but your land use plan follows a revenue land holding pattern. That is a given, otherwise you can't really work to get an agreement with the local authorities and with the state authorities. And if you look at what's happening in Kottakarai, what is amazing is that this part of Kottakarai, which is being slowly developing more and more into the center, is actually part of Ode Perambuk, which has been something that could happen only because of the watershed management work that we've been doing. If we disturb this work, we are actually going to be damaging the investment of people who have developed there. There's a, I don't know if Prashant told you about northeastern part of Pondicherry and the development there. Did he mention that? So all the work that has been done in Fokama, Success and other areas prevents flooding of Laspet, Rediyarpalayam and other places, okay? Because of that, those low-lying areas, which used to be periodically flooded all the time, are not getting that flooded. And that has allowed them to put their roads and other stuff, which, of course, this year with the monsoon that we had. So it's the same thing here. The village has been expanding into Ode Parambuk and into these areas which are low-lying because of the afforestation work done between Darkali, between Revelation, and around in this area, in the pump house and other thing, which prevents this fast flow of water. So whatever we do, we need to make sure that the downstream effect is not going to affect our relationship with the village. So putting all these overlays together, this is what we get. Okay? So we are able to then see in this what is happening in terms of the afforested areas, village, archaeology, watersheds, and you see actually a pattern emerging that shows that there is plenty of flexibility in translating the master plan in harmony with the natural topography and being able to work on a system of protecting our own ecosystem services in the long run. So I'm not going to go into detail. What I will do is we did zone by zone analysis of problem areas, land ownership. So for the analysis, we said December 2012 is our cutoff date. For some reason, which cannot be questioned, we cannot buy any more land. Whatever land is already settled and used, whether it's forest or settlements or whatever, nobody wants to break their fence and allow any more development, okay? And we will not touch any area which in a way that will damage our watershed work and will compromise on our ecosystem services. So taking that into account, we looked at how do we do this. So I'm going to stop after the residential zone, but we have done it for all the zones. If you take the Galaxy plan and the master plan, it says there are 5 sectors in the residential zone. Okay, so you have sector 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they are graded by what is called the low density, not so low density, medium, not so high, high. Okay, now we said what happens if we could actually translate the densities, also taking into account the lines of forces, not just have the building standing there, but translate the density into our zonal plan. Now, taking that further into account, we said, like I told you, you can't build on lands that you don't own. You can't build on lands that are already developed. So all the gray areas that you see, no more development after December 2012. And all the whites, lands that will never be purchased. And all the green and the blues for our water security and for our watershed, we can't do it. If we had only these patches that we could develop, and we create a study which takes into account a development thing, what happens? So we worked on several scenarios. This is the most extreme scenario where we said that we cannot build on private lands, nor on the plots developed, and we respect all the no-build areas as per the ecosystem services. We will never have an FAR which is more than 2. We will never have a ground coverage which is less than 20% or more than 50%. That means if you have 1 acre of land, it will be 0.2 acres or 0.5 acres only. We will not go below that or we will not go above that. And in terms of looking at energy, tropical housing, and kind of low operational energy systems in residential and other services, we will only go G+1 to G+4. Okay? How many people can we then accommodate? So we did that, and we said we'll take habitat typology of park-like, where you have few people who live in kind of suburban. We'll have people living in row houses, clusters, apartments. So when we did that, we came to 34,000 people, almost 35,000 people at 38 square meter per person, where we have taken 30 square meter as the habitable space and 8 square meter per inhabitant going towards services. And this does not take into account the area of the crown, which will also provide services. So in a way, we did that for all the sectors, taking the extreme conditions to see, because there are certain myths that we are living with in Oroville, which as years go by and decades go by, they become non-questionable. One of the myths is that the way we have developed in the last 50 years, we will never be able to have 50,000 people here, okay? Another myth is that if we don't get all the land, we can never build this city, right? And the third myth is that if we have to house 50,000 people, we have to make sure that everybody lives only in 30 square meters, okay? And we still have to have the crown. So when we broke it down into FARs, ground coverage, building heights, setback for roads, setback of 25 meters on either side of the canyon, protecting the existing tree cover areas, and saying that the crown has so many square meters that can be developed in terms of services, we can still have 35,000 people in the residential zone, not counting the people who are already living there. Given the fact that the other 3 zones will also allow for habitation, I have a feeling that maybe we should take the discussion from there to something else. The something else which Lalit tried to also bring, and I have been trying to talk about, is that our problem is not about the master plan or the galaxy concept. Our problem is, how do we actually have a debate? How do we talk about certain inconvenient and uncomfortable data that emerge? Because this study was done as part of a larger study. If you look at the work order that TDC issued to us, this is 1/3 of the study. At this point, when we had this, we wanted to, I'm not going to go into all this because it gets kind of, you guys have the report, read someday, okay? And we said, we even went into looking at water security and microclimate, and also in terms of equity of open space, and we came up with areas that can be further put under tree cover. It's not like what we have is enough. We need more areas under tree cover in the city area. And I'm sorry to say this, but this is a reality, okay? So taking all that into account, we said, we did consultation with focus groups, working groups. You know, this is the process that we were supposed to do. Once the study was ready, we had discussions with all the different experts. We had discussions with people who had done previous studies, integrated it, came up with this document and report. We shared it. The step first was we should have a consultation with focus groups and working groups. But as it was a study that was done under TDC, and as a consultant to TDC, they had to be taken into the cycle of work. We never went into even the step 1. Because there is a problem where discussion in the TDC could not happen because we talked about taking into account topography, ecosystem services, existing land use, you know, the master plan, adapting to take that into account, because we said 68 is that, 2001 is that, 2012 is this, and it's possible to integrate. If we can have a discussion on how we integrate, what do we integrate, and what is important for us. Let's list out what is important for us, and based on that, let's work on an operating principle of integration. So we had 2 meetings, and both the meetings, after 10-15 minutes, had some people having an emotional crisis. And I'm very bad when it comes to emotional crisis, because I just stand there and say, okay, what am I going to do with them, you know? One is crying, the other one is screaming, okay, you know, I just shut up. Then we were supposed to have an RA process where we could have a consultation with different people in the RA. There would be a selection of people who want to volunteer, a selection of people who should be in the thing. And then based on the output of both the focus group and the working groups, appoint qualified consultants. Already at that time, we were talking with Vastu Shilpa Foundation. I think you guys must be tired of us. We are always talking with you, you know? To how do we take the output of that into integration to prepare an urban plan, including mobility? Because we will have only a proposed land use plan if we have also at this point taken into what will be the urban strategic plan, and how do we evolve a mobility plan that will have short, medium, and long-term output. Where do we want to go and how do we want to go there? Then based on that, take up an integrated land use plan as per the government regulation with mobility integrated and a land schedule document. And then based on that, have an RA process of consultation so that then we can actually approach whoever needs to be approached, whether it's a district planning authority. At that time in 2015, they were just talking about it. It's still not happened in Villupuram area, district planning authority, and take their inputs in and to see how we can do a local area consultation. And then undertake the process for land use change with the district planning body. So this was part of the work that I was supposed to do. But we stopped there. After we did this, we stopped because nothing could happen. Twice I tried to bring the discussion up with TDC. And unfortunately, of course, most of the studies we do in CSR, Julia will tell you that, we do not charge any consultancy fee to TDC or to Oroville or to anybody. CSR is a research, planning and research organization. We do our own fundraising and we work for Oroville with our own fundraising. So we put up these studies after we know what is our financial resources, who will donate to it, and we do the work for TDC. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you. I had not seen this before. It's also one of those presentations which I see as first time after being here 5 years. So it's really good for me to see that, and I'm sure it's for other people also. My question is regarding the land use and the DDP. What is the relation between them, if you can just briefly
Okay,
answer
so if you look at how, you see, the thing is that historically in India, after we sent the British home, the Delhi came up with a master plan, and that became a kind of template for all the other cities to take up master planning. Now, Delhi had a very peculiar situation. It had a lot of villages that were integrated into the area that came under the Delhi master plan area at that time. Yes. So what they did was very peculiar, which is quite interesting as a case study, because most probably we will end up doing that, is that these villages were outlined with a red oil pencil, which had a certain thickness. So, okay? And that thickness, even when we were studying urban planning, that thickness was being measured to see what was the border and where can they actually have the setback of the border, okay? These areas were not given any urban infrastructure. Public transportation, sewage, waste collection, electricity, nothing. They were called Lal Dora because it was ringed by a red line. Delhi has a very peculiar situation also about ownership. A large part of Delhi comes under the Delhi Development Authority. You lease land from them. You are not landowners, okay? Which means that there is an existing land use within which you have to function, and there is an existing mobility plan within which you have to arrange your development. And it also has, peculiar enough, in between these areas, lands which are privately owned, which creates another challenge in terms of your mobility planning. Because you can control only in the lands owned by Delhi Development Authority, but not on the other one. And then you have areas which are completely outside any master planning. This was kind of adopted by many other cities, and we reached a point of chaos a bit. I mean, Indian cities are nothing to write home about, but sometime in late 80s, when they were looking at the social situation in urban India, the average figure of people living in politically incorrect terms, slums, between both the metros and the first-tier cities was over 50%. Okay? This was not possible to continue. So they needed to do several things. One is, of course, look at programs that would help these people, livelihood and other things, but also to relook at how we plan our cities. So the 73rd and 74th Amendment came into being, and that got translated into what is called urban plan implementation, urban development plan planning and implementation. So in '96 that came into being, and that laid out a process of how you make master plans. From there, how do you do your land use plans, your mobility plans? How do you actually do consultation and other things? Sometime in 2014, they realized that that is not enough, that cities don't exist in isolation from the region. So they came up with an amendment to it, which is now called Urban and Regional Plan Development and Implementation. And it's actually a very amazing document. I mean, it's a bit difficult to read. It's 450 pages, and the appendix is another 350 pages, but it is really kind of very comprehensive and very advanced and very participatory and extremely flexible. Okay? It looks at so many peculiarities of situations and gives you processes and structures on how to deal with existing brownfield development, greenfield development, and things like that. We need to look at that. And then there's the Amrut Guidelines 2.0, which is kind of a follow-up where they look at water plans. Because India is a country that is water deficit, energy deficit, with a large part of the population that is going or already into its reproductive age. We have very difficult economic situation, and 90% or so as unorganized sector in terms of employment. So with these enormous challenges, which are nothing compared to the challenges that we have in Auroville, we are very privileged. Okay? In spite of that, those things actually could work. And they would work if the system of governance, decision making, and administration was aligned. And I think this is where I think Auroville could show the way, not about what we develop in terms of roads or buildings, but actually the system of development. If we can find the key to the system of development here, which would take into planning, governance planning, how we make decisions, how we actually integrate different things, we have filled the gap that this regulation fails. There, they have not been able to change that gap of decision making. Here we have. And so I would say we have the Master Plan 2001, which is very broadly 3 sections. One is the lays out the goals and intents and things. Second, it actually gives you, if you look at the second part, it's basically kind of operating principles, which says, what are we doing in terms of green work and water and our different activities and social activities? And the third says, these are the kind of developments that we would like to do in the next 5 years. There's what Tuan calls the development plan, but actually it's a list of things that we would like to develop so that we can have a city that includes all this without actually prioritizing one over the other, but integrating all these needs to ensure that the diversity is not just in terms of socio-ethnic and nationality, but diversity in terms of activity and economic output. From there, if we can integrate the first part of work which was done with Doshiji in 2009, the land suitability analysis, and then work towards actually integrated land use plan, parallelly, because life doesn't stop, parallelly along with what should be our development priorities while we are working towards a DDP, because we can't stop everything till we have a DDP, but we should not also take up things that will prevent us from having a flexibility to move in a certain direction. Like Lalit said, planning is about synthesis. If we cannot synthesize the inconvenient, uncomfortable, and also the gifts, we will lose all 3. If you don't synthesize in town planning, and if you don't synthesize in urban planning, all you will do is alienate not just the population, but you will actually alienate the geography from where you're growing. And I can tell you, pardon my French, geography is a bitch, doesn't forgive alienation. You have cities that are suffering since decades because they did not take their geography into account. You will not be able to change your geography. You're here, hot, humid, water deficit area, that's how it is. So we need to do a land use plan, parallelly work on our development priorities. I will talk about that tomorrow afternoon, something like that, where we can actually create certain kinds of balance. But the other thing that I would like to take up, but I can't, is to see how do we make decisions, our governance system between policies, programs, projects, and our working group system so that we integrate our development with our day-to-day life. Thank you.
So I just have a question, not just to Suhasini, but David and maybe Shelja, people who are building in the residential, have built in the RZ1 and 2. According to this table, we see about 9,000 projected population with a low-rise, high-density development.
No, low-rise, low-density also.
Low-rise, low-density
Yeah, because
also.
you see here, if you look at sector 1, basically I have only 0.5 FAR.
Okay.
Okay. And we have looking at the land available for development after setting out all the existing land use, everything. And so with the ground coverage of 0.5 FAR, building heights, we have given the building height of 7.5 meters from the road and 10 meters from the road. These are the finished building heights from the road level. That's another thing, because we never look at roads in a manner of setting actually the baseline for all development on either side.
The question to you three is that we've actually used up a lot of the land in these zones, and we only have about 800 people living right now there, right?
But
so
that takes into account
densities don't seem to match the grammar of planning that you're suggesting. So how do we densify these two zones to match the
Manu, you didn't get
population?
it. Let me go back one step. You see here, in the sector 1, okay? This is your sector 1. These are areas where there's no more development. I'm just talking about these yellows and these oranges. This 4,000 that you see is on this yellow and oranges. It's not on the densifying the others. Because you see, I want to create, lay out a scenario. I'm not saying that is the scenario that we should adopt. First, I want to clear this myth that creates distrust and is pushing people to indulge in all kind of myths. First, let's get that out of the way so that we have a real discussion on the issues. So when we said that, in sector 1, okay, this yellow patches and this orange patch is all that we have. Based on that, what do we have? Based on that, this is what we have as land available for development, where there is 2/3 is going to be 0.5 FAR and 1/3 is going to be 1 FAR. Okay? So I think the premise of your question does not apply to this table. Can we move on? Thank you.
Thanks, Suhasini. You just mentioned myth, and you said at one slide there was that nothing happened, and there's also a myth that the RA is never really involved and incapable. I remember in 2017, you and many other qualified people were working on a restructuring of the TDC, and there was a lot of work going into development priorities, terms of references, restructuring of the TDC, becoming an interface team which connects with the community, interacts with the community, helps the community or hears the community, defines with the community together development priorities, and then goes into technical teams. So what happened with that? Is that possible to answer in 1 minute?
I answered that. No, we have a serious issue when it comes to linking between identifying what is our goals. Because we always talk of the big goal. Mother said, my Taj Mahal will be built, okay? So all of us unite behind that. But we never are able to unite behind our mid and short-term goals. And this is a serious issue because it's an output of something else. We have a governance system in place that has emerged due to 2 major challenges that we have had historically. One was the early part of Orwell, where we had a challenge between an agency that actually questioned the validity of how this project was growing. And the other challenge that was there was we had the Foundation Act that came into being, and we never looked at how Orwell and the Foundation Act actually relates to each other in a manner that we look at 2 different things. For me, there is 2 very different things happening in Orwell. One is that we are here to do a certain work, okay? Out of which one output is a city. But the other output is actually to build a society that is non-transactional, that can maintain diversity without becoming hierarchical, and that can actually change human nature, which Robin is talking about, from being competitive to cooperative, okay? A city that does not allow that to happen, or that does not allow this to happen, is not an option. So how are we relating to this area, to the government, to the Foundation Act, and our historical challenges of how we make decisions? This is a study that I've been working on alone, but I would like to integrate some other people in it. The thing is that we are getting money from the government. The present crisis makes people say silly things like, if we had never taken money from the government, we would not be here, which is the silliest thing I've ever heard. Because when we take money from the government, it is not to develop Oroville for our needs or our desires or our immediate thing. It is actually to establish a collaborative thing between Oroville, India, and the world. Madhav said very clearly, Oroville is the place where the difficulties of modern India will be done, because India is the crux of, will show the way for the world, okay? All the collaboration, capital, and how do you say, our output with the corporates and other projects is actually part of that. That is a given for me. The other part that we do not value is the kind of work that we are doing, which is what they call sweat equity, which means the effort that we're putting in. You do not have 3,500 people in a corporate sector with the kind of commitment, doing the kind of diversity of jobs we are doing, whether acquired or academic qualification, and doing it day after day, decade after decade. This value is what gives that capital that value. Otherwise, nobody's interested in giving us the money. Now, how do we make sure that that capital and the value of the commitment that is here is able to move forward in a manner that it takes and adapts as we change? We are not able to adapt our governance structure. We keep doing cut and paste. We're doing all kinds of things, but our governance structure is the main issue. So the RA does not function because the people in Oroville feel frustrated after some time because they don't feel heard. But they're not heard because they don't actually go out and educate themselves also. So you come to the RA with an opinion. I mean, people that I love very much, I've heard them too often, you know. So I get bored. I go away, not because I'm not committed to Oroville, but I get bored. You know, sorry, that's how it is. I know who is going to say what to whom and when and where. We are stuck in this loop, you know, and each time we use outside forces to push through ours or their point of view, and we then get back tighter into the loop because of that. And that's how it is. We need to relook at our decision making, and that we cannot do unless we have an administrative structure that is not changing every 2 to 4 years in all our working group, because there's no continuity, no institutional thing, that we don't have a management structure, but we want to have a decision-making people to do the other two also, without job training.
That may be, but the fact that you don't want to touch the part that you've already covered.
But in spite of that, you can get 35,000 people. So why are you going and bothering those people? You first thing people do here when they come up with DDP for the sector 1 and 2 is bother the people who are there, and then we get stuck there in that conflict. We have enough to start with. When Doshiji and we all walked the land, he said, look, there is so much that you can do without having to bother people right now. You can do a lot more work. If there is a problem in this area, just leave that and do other things. Don't just go bang your head on that. We're only creating more conflicts. We're banging. If I don't get that, I don't want the rest. I mean, you have 2 children. How do you deal with it? You say, no, you have to do that. No, you deflect. You find something positive to do. You don't pick a point and then get stuck on that.
Yeah, because I'm not dealing with collectivity at home. In Oroville.
Yeah, you have an authority, but we can't have an authority. I try to, yeah, so that's why I'm saying don't get into stuff like, you know, this or nothing. Then you have nothing, usually.